Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Well, hello all. Thanks for joining us on this Market Research Podcast, Now That's Significant. This is your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at InfoTools. Today, we're joined by Priscilla McKinney, CEO and Momma Bird at Little Bird Marketing. Thanks for joining us, Priscilla.
This is really lovely. I've been looking forward to it, Michael.
Yes, thank you. So you state in your LinkedIn profile that you miraculously found your way into the most ideal place in the world, the intersection of marketing, business, and market research. How did this come about? How did your early experiences shape you and lead you into the realm of market research?
Well, I'd like to say there was just like this massive destiny going on, but I think it came, like a lot of people in market research by hook or by crook. But I'll back up a little bit to tell you about my unique place and how I think it all makes sense. And I am the fifth of five girls. So already that's it's like a wow factor. It was quite an interesting upbringing. But we traveled the world singing, and I was growing up constantly in matching dresses. I was the littlest of the crew. And so, when you have five people in a matching dress, you can imagine that as soon as someone grows out of one of the sizes of the dress, it just gets, a hand-me-down to the next daughter. So I wore the very same dress for much of my life. And we also, dabbled in puppet shows and all these other interesting things. I grew up overseas. And all of this, seems like it is not important and that it's just good cocktail party conversation, but it actually is meaningful into how I got into market research. And that is that I ended up in university getting a degree in cultural anthropology. I couldn't think of anything else that made more sense to me. And then I began in business. And the first time I was asked to speak at a market research event, it was Green Book who had called and wanted me to speak at their Insights Marketing Day. And I thought, well, this is interesting. You do what? They do market research. I'm like, and you want me why? Well, because you do marketing. And this is where, those two things collided, the first time. And really, obviously, I'm running a company at that time too. So, you've got that entrepreneurship on top of it. But my experiences really made me very curious about life, about people, about places, about the meanings we have, like about our social norms. How do we agree to behave? And all of these things make a lot of sense when you look at marketing and when you look at market research. So I think I'm just at a very interesting perch, if you will, to look out over, the span of marketing and market research and how they come back in and out of each other and blend. And I think one informs the other. And then I think that what I call the stunning discomfort of entrepreneurship informs the last piece. We're all here. We want to do a great job. We want to do things that are meaningful, but we also need to make money. And so I think that's the interesting melange. And from that, those experiences, that's where I come to my position on this crazy intersection that I talk about.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for the introduction. And I'm equally curious to understand people's backgrounds as well. My dad was an engineer, so he had a love of the world and how it works. So that came through onto me. And so with the rich story you've just shared with us, what's the most significant thing you're going to tell us on the podcast today?
Well, I think that we all do have our own interesting perspective, but I do think what is significant is that we all need to be aware of what is informing our opinions about what we're seeing out there in the world, because all of us are seeing through a lens. And that lens sometimes is, pushes us a little bit more towards the truth. And sometimes that lens pushes us away from it. And, we're human. So this is like the cultural anthropology, part of the discussion is that we can't get away from being human. And I know that as market researchers, none of us really want to get away from being human. We're crazy curious about the experience of humanity. But I just would say what is significant that I want to bring to light today is that you need to actually reflect on where what is that perch that you're sitting at, looking at it, because it's influencing what you see and how you see it.
Okay, so what does that then mean for brands then? Like, how does that human aspect feed into how brands approach market research?
Well, I think we'll all laugh pretty hard when I say that it first starts out by that funny, moment where, an end client would say, oh, we don't need market research. We know what our client needs or what our client wants, right? So that's like, ouch, to any market researcher. Or once we are engaged with an end client, and this is a lot of my clients are working with, end brands, and they think either they already know what the customer wants, or they don't know exactly how to shed their own view of their brand and set it aside enough in order to write a great screener or a great qualitative guide or a great survey. And so sometimes we get in our own ways. And so I think that's how it comes out in market research specifically. And I think it would be good for us to have these conversations about how we're bringing our own humanity into our careers and understanding there are a couple of things that we're going to need to recognize and put by the wayside so that we can have a really strong approach to the way we go about doing, our work.
Oh, sure. From an industry point of view, then, how do they seek to get that humanity to keep it into the work that they're doing?
Well, I think it is different in qual and quant. And then now we're not really seeing such a big divide in qual and quant. It's such a blended, experience. And then I would add a third piece in there. That's text and like info tools. There's a lot of platforms and technology out there to try and help people. But I think that, we can't be led by the tool. We can't be led by the qual methodology, and we can't be led by the quant methodology, right? We have to be able to have teams that we trust to come into a room and say, okay, how can we shed those? Let's put those things aside for just a moment. Let's get to the root of what we're talking about in terms of the humanity. So it sounds like a joke, but a customer enters a bar. Right? So how do you start back at the beginning, remembering that you yourself are a consumer? And even when you're not, let's say I drive here to work, and on the way I'm listening to an advertisement and it's driving me bonkers, so bonkers that I'm happy to switch the channel. Right. But then I come into work and I sit down as the CEO of a digital marketing company, and then I write a script that I would want to change the channel on. Right. And so I think sometimes that's, I have to deal with it in my own profession, but we need to be able to get in touch with our own humanity and then go do our jobs, from that.
That's a very good point. So I guess what you're pushing for is a standard that both brands and the industry need to adhere to. But I guess if you just take what standards they currently are, it does seem like they have dropped in recent years. Can you give an indication why this might be?
Well, I'm not sure why exactly, but I will say this. Maybe it's easier to poke at a monster. So let me take Qualtrics, for example. Okay. I get off the plane and I receive a 20-question survey about issues that I really don't care about. Like, I would love to say, would you like to give your feedback about your experience on United? Well, yeah, I've got a couple of things to say, as it turns out. Oh, they're not going to ask me anything I want to say. They're going to ask me their 20 questions. And, I want to participate. Maybe I'm in a good space to be able to do that. But by 20 questions, I'm exhausted, and asking me questions that are really not even pertinent to the journey I went on. Well, then I get off that plane. Well, you know what you do when you get off a plane? You get on another one, right? So then I get off that next flight because it's 2 to get anywhere anymore. And, and then I get the exact same survey about the very next thing. Still no place where I get to actually, say what I want to do. Then I get to the hotel, and they want to know how my check-in experience was. I've got these things. I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I get to my room. I'm within there, there maybe 3 hours. How is the room? I go to dinner. Would you like to take a survey? It's maddening to me. And I don't want to be treated like that. And I want to be able to participate with the brand. I do want to give back. I do want feedback. I want to let brands know how I'm feeling and not just when I'm pissed. But there's really not a good way for me to give a quick high five or a shout out or a positive piece of feedback that's not already prescribed. And from 1 to 5, what do you think? So I use that example because I think it's kind of easy to mock and we all can laugh a little bit about it. But I think what's important is that we laugh at that and say, oh, and how am I participating in that? So that's from a DIY, from a tool, from a platform perspective. That's from a qual standpoint. That's from a quant standpoint. I just think, there's a lot that could have been done to think about brand and industry standards before that survey went out.
For sure. How about then the different standards between quant and qualitative? You said that they have kind of merged together, but are there different standards required for each?
Well, yeah, and probably there's someone better qualified to talk about that than I am. But, I would say there's something a little bit more complicated that I probably could add to that conversation, not necessarily what those standards are, but the fact that some things are changing in this industry and we need to be really aware of them. And one of the biggest issues I see happening that is more of a macro issue is the beginning of a lot of private equity into this industry of market research. So whether it's a platform, a technology, a qual, a quant, or a blended methodology, I think we need to be thinking about these standards and looking for ways that we can come together and collaborate even with our competitors and agree on some standards, because I do see some things slipping and I do see some companies moving pretty far ahead, making some bigger strides because they're starting to create standards where there aren't industry standards. Does that make sense? Like they're becoming the gold standard themselves, because there is a little bit of a dearth of our industry policing ourselves.
No, sure.
I think the biggest way you can see this is in sample, right? It's kind of been the dirty little secret, that sample quality has been poor for quite some time. We've got fraud, we've got bots, we've got, inattentive people, and also the other little secret that everybody's buying from everybody, right? That there's an overlap and a pulling from multiple places and from aggregators, and that people are really not putting in the money and investing in cleaning their own databases, but they just keep selling what they've been selling, or as they like to call it, slinging sample, right? And so I also don't mean to pick just on quant. There are so many issues like this across the industry, but I just would say the thing that I think I can offer is, start policing yourself or you're going to get policed.
Yes, for sure. So just drawing on your experience, you've worked with a lot of the leaders in the market research space, whether it's users or the supply or the demand. You don't necessarily have to get into particular brands or names. What does good look like from a standards perspective from both a brand or industry?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I can call a couple of names out of people I think who are leading the way. And typically when I think about that, I think about people who are far more thought leaders. In the qual space, I would say, for recruiting and really, calling out, how much we need to work on the experience for the actual respondent. I would say fieldwork has really been leading that conversation, not just nationally, but globally, and saying, look, we need to be in the hospitality business if we're going to, be asking people to give us their feedback and their time, their precious time to tell us what they think about our products and services. We need to make this a nice experience. And so we can't just throw people in what looks like, a very sketchy place downtown or, or a mall back closet,
Yeah.
they need to have a good experience. And I do hope that the CX and UX, types of conversations that are coming out, are going to continue to trickle into how are we teaching, treating the respondents. So in the qual space, I think Fieldwork has done a fantastic job really honing in on that idea of hospitality. It should be easy for the respondent to find the place they're supposed to be. They should be clear about how they're going to get paid. They should be clear about what they're going to get paid. All these kinds of things that are a lot of details. So I think that's a leader there. I do think that in the quant space, I've really seen, Lisa Wilding Brown, the CEO over at Innovate MR, she's been a huge proponent for quality, really crying out that we need to police ourselves. I think that really the kudos of that go to her. But there have been other companies really succeeding and getting ahead on that. Cloud Research created Century, and I think that's what a good brand looks like. It's basically saying, hey, let's police ourselves before someone else does, and let's get to beyond just digital fingerprinting respondents. Like, we need more. We need to understand behaviorally, is this a good respondent? And so really at the end, that's more of an issue of providing, say, to a brand, say to a Coca-Cola, Hershey, or someone like that, saying, hey, when we provide your survey back, we know that really attentive and high quality people answered this for you. So we are really confident in the information. But where I've seen a lot of companies do best without external policing has been in things like info tools. It has been in things like platforms and technology. And I personally think that the reason that is they've had to launch and do the hard brand strategy work and make the why and really clear the unique value proposition they have to the end user. They didn't have their, they couldn't rest on any laurels because everything they're doing is brand new. So I've seen the technology companies do very well in understanding how to meet brand standards and how to really answer, industry standards and improve them without someone having to force them. That's just my personal opinion.
That's true. So you've seen the whole standards issue with AI. So basically, there's this new sparkly technology that people have been jumping at, and there are those out there that are doing the right thing, that are putting the checks in places, that are showing how their AI is reaching various answers or outcomes. And what you're going to see in the market, it's starting to happen, but it's also going to happen down the line. The market will either choose to stick with these people and will move away from those that aren't putting in place these standards. And then on the other hand, you're also getting compliance. So the law, governments, etc., are starting to crack down on bad practice as well. So you're having the legal side of things, but also the market saying, look, we need to be doing this right.
100%. Okay. So let's kind of unpack what you just said, because I think it is really important, but it did make me think as you were speaking of the famous quote. And I think it was, someone first, but Vince Lombardi really, made it pretty famous. The quote, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." And I think we're all incredibly tired. And I think the reason why brand standards and industry standards drop, especially when there's not a direct pressure from the end client to keep them up, is because we're all being asked to do so much more with so much less at all of our jobs. If you compound that with the Great Resignation, now I've got someone I got to deal with who's started that job last Tuesday, who doesn't know anything about their job. And so if I'm a platform, a DIY platform for some kind of a methodology, oh my gosh, I've got so much time now trying to train someone new in this and in this methodology. And so when we are so exhausted just getting our sheer base jobs done, we don't have the room for those amazing conversations I talked about at the very beginning, where we come in the room, we understand, the robe we put on over, or the hat, or the, whatever it is, the mystique that we think we have as a professional coming into a room. We don't strip that down, and we don't have the real difficult conversation about, wait a minute, if we did this qual, quant, DIY, whatever it is, if we use this, are we going to get any closer to the client? Are we going to get any closer to the user? Is it going to spark a new understanding about who they are and what they do and why they do it? Why is this product or service important to them, or why is it completely irrelevant to them? And so we're just, I think, pretty exhausted, and that is one of the biggest reasons why these standards may fail in different places. And I think they will continue to, unless the industry really takes a good look at that as well.
Yes. But I mean, there's obviously a lot of good that can come of it when brands get it right.
100%. I mean, look at all of these winning brands who really have decided to walk away from the shiny object. And even, I'm not talking about like, technology. Of course, you mentioned AI. Well, I don't mean like, if you're going to be serious, you walk away from the shiny. No, there's a shiny object here, but what is the value of this shiny object? And I think winning teams are able to take this new technology and integrate it quickly, but yet keep very focused, laser focused on that core. Why are we using this new technology? What are we hoping to gain? And that's when I think brand standards and industry standards can really be maintained. And you see some of these companies just shoot up, and they, even during a very difficult time, which we've had many, many difficult times in the past 2.5 years, we see some companies really thrive even in difficult times. And I think we're going to see that. I hate to use the word recession on your podcast, but as we have whatever length of a recession we're going to have, this is really a key time for companies and for market research professionals to be evaluating, how closely they can stay in alignment with their clients' real needs. And not pursue the shiny things. Now, do it with shiny things, that's fine, but the quality of the conversation needs to be on why they're doing it.
Yes, so if we take that shiny analogy that you've just said there, someone once told me, if you can make technology disappear, make that shiny thing appear dull, if you were, so people can go through the whole process and not even realize that they were actually doing it.
Right.
That's the goal. So from a research perspective, make it feel like it's not research, make it feel like it's a conversation or whatever it is, however you're collecting it, and then you can get down to some raw truths. People are far more open to new things or free with their thoughts.
Oh, I love that. Don't even call it research. Let's just call it like actualized curiosity, and so let brands get curious about their products and services. Let them ask these interesting questions. And that is, let the technology just completely fall away. When I talk on my podcast, the Digital Transformation Success Podcast, we talk about that all the time. It's not the technology. It's how much can the technology disappear? And I just feel like my own brain, which is the best technology, right? That my brain is able to move at the right pace and speed. And it's being, accelerated because of whatever technology I'm using, but I'm still, my brain is the thing that is directing me to do the next thing and the next thing and to put them in the right order, but get them done in a meaningful time frame. So at that point, I don't want to be beholden to a particular technology. I want to be able to be enabled to really, do what I know needs to be done as a professional and as an expert in my field, but being able to do it in less time, with greater ease, with less frustration. So all of those things come into play.
So the standards, I guess, is all about making us as respondents or whatnot less roboticized and more humanized, if that makes sense.
I love it. Yeah, it is. Kristen Luck refers to it even many years ago, like I think 5 or 6 years ago, we were talking about some of these things and she's like, it's the rise of the human, Priscilla. We're gonna do it in market research, which is just a funny irony because the market research industry should be, if not anything else, championing the human, right? And the human voice. And yet that's not what we've seen in a lot of places. And so I do like technology, and I do want it to come and help us, amplify our learning and actually get to it quicker and be able to make more meaningful pivots in business. That's super important. But yeah, it's absolutely the human element. I'm with you on that.
Oh, cool. So it's been a fascinating conversation. If I can recap what we've talked about today, it's that need to keep that human element in our market research, in what we're doing, in marketing teams and product teams that all feed in from the research that we have. It's being mindful of the quantitative and qualitative aspects of these standards and how they play off. We looked at what good looks like, how some companies are using technology well, how they're making that technology disappear per se, and then helping people really come in and offer their insights and their thoughts in ways that are comfortable for them. It's putting that consumer, that person first. We had a little dip into your introduction as well, and that just reminded us again to be respecting the context of people, who we're asking, how we're asking, being mindful that they're being asked for questions in so many different aspects of their life, and it can be so easy to conflate experiences and therefore muddy the responses that we get as well. We touched briefly on the different standards between quant and qual, and also the standards that both brands and the industry should be aiming for, but also trying to agree on as well, including the need for us to do the right thing, to achieve standards that we know are right, because it's the good thing to do. So I think that covered it all. Anything that I missed?
Well, I would just say that there's also one other aspect of standards and industry standards, and that is really being involved in some great associations. And one thing that comes to mind for me is really the visionary leadership from Melanie Courtwright over at Insights Association. I think she's done a lot to help us get together and collaborate, and kind of that idea of let's police ourselves before we have to police ourselves. So I think the more you can get involved in things like that, I think there's just so much innovative and collaborative talk around IIEX that Green Book puts on. And also I'm really looking forward to SMR Congress. So when you look at like, what is it we're supposed to be doing globally, I just shout out to those places, because I think, we can't just all live in our own little cocoon. We've got to work and find a way to, get our best practices and our learnings all together. Now, I'm not saying, trade secrets. We're not going to share trade secrets, but there is an effective way that this industry can come together and collaborate. And I think it also offers space for, new technologies to arise and new ways of thinking. And, I would just give, I guess, this final, note of some inspiration. One thing that I've loved seeing come on the scene more recently was civic science intelligence, and to see how they were solving, some what we would kind of everybody else calls research, and they've come out into the market and not called it research. And I think if you're interested in understanding what that could look like, more to your point, of how you said, Michael, that, technology should just like fall off, and we're not interested in debating the technology anymore, but we're looking at, oh my gosh, these results are amazing. I think if we can get out of our own way, those are some of the really interesting, solutions that can pop up, where maybe really, challenges that the industry has faced for years all of a sudden seem to disappear because there's a new way of thinking about it. So, I think the importance of, contributing to the conversation, podcasts like yours, where we can all share ideas and kind of get inspired. I guarantee you something I said is not going to be, maybe important in the context in which I said it, but maybe it sparks an idea for someone to think about something in our industry a little bit differently, or just to reach out to someone else and start a better conversation. So, to that end, Michael, thanks for having me on and even putting up with my own opinion.
No, it has been good. And from a selfish perspective as well, I love having conversations like this with market leaders, etc. You do pick up and learn on things, and all for the better. And I'm glad to be able to share it with others as well. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
All right. And for the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard today, feel free to subscribe to the podcast, share it with others. And if you really like the show, leave a review. Would be very appreciative of that. So thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.